I love you. I love you. I love
There are wounds we carry that did not begin with us. You may look at your life today, at your anxiety, your fear of abandonment, your people-pleasing, your emotional fragility, your tendency to collapse under pressure, and think, what's wrong with me? Why am I like this? Why can't I handle life the way others seem to? But the truth most people never learn is this. Some of the battles you are fighting were never yours to begin with. Before you took your first breath, before you learned your first word, before you even had a personality, your parents' emotional reality was already shaping your nervous system. Their unprocessed grief became your sensitivity. Their fear became your anxiety. Their shame became your self-doubt. Their silence became your confusion. Their wounds became your inheritance. You didn't just inherit their genes, you inherited their psychology. Carl Jung believed that trauma echoes through bloodlines, carried unconsciously from one generation to the next until someone becomes aware enough and strong enough to confront it. He called this the ancestral shadow. And for many people, the reason they feel weak, fragile, or emotionally overwhelmed is not because they lack strength, but because they were born into a story full of unresolved chapters. This video explores why your parents' trauma transferred to you, why it made you feel weak, and why Jung believed that this weakness is actually the early sign of someone destined to break the generational pattern. Not the problem, but the solution. 1. The unseen emotional womb. Long before you knew anything about life, you lived inside the atmosphere of your parents' unresolved wounds. A child does not grow inside a vacuum. A child grows inside a psychic ecosystem. Most people think trauma is passed down through behavior, yelling, neglect, emotional inconsistency, instability. But the transmission begins far earlier. It happens energetically, non-verbally, unconsciously. A mother who lived her whole life in fear carries a nervous system wired for danger. A father who never learned to express emotion carries tension in his body like a fist that never unclenches. A parent who grew up unheard or unseen resists vulnerability, avoids connection, or fears intimacy. The child absorbs this, not intentionally, not consciously, but automatically, because the developing brain adapts to whatever environment it is given. If the emotional air you breathed as a child was full of fear, chaos, numbness, shame, or instability, your mind learned to treat those states as normal. Your personality did not grow from who you truly were. It grew around your parents' wounds, like a tree bending itself around an obstacle. Jung called this the invisible inheritance, the unconscious material that flows from parent to child without anyone realizing it. This is the emotional DNA you never chose. 2. The weakness that isn't weakness. Many adults who carry their parents' unprocessed trauma describe themselves using words like, "I'm too sensitive," "I'm weak," "I'm broken," "I overreact," "I can't handle things." But Jung believed these so-called weak traits are not weaknesses. They are symptoms of emotional overload. A child who grows up in a home full of stress becomes hyper-attuned to danger. A child who grows up in silence becomes overly observant. A child who grows up with unpredictable parents becomes hypervigilant, worried, overly responsible, or fearful of making mistakes. This isn't weakness. This is adaptive intelligence. Your nervous system adapted to survive an emotional environment that overwhelmed you. Your sensitivity was not a flaw. It was your defense. Your awareness was not fragility. It was your radar. Your hesitation was not cowardice. It was self-protection. You weren't weak. You were carrying the weight of two people, sometimes more. Children cannot name this burden, but they feel it in their bodies. They become the emotional shock absorber of the family, absorbing tension, absorbing conflict, absorbing unmet needs, absorbing the silence. This is how the inheritance is passed, not through choice, but through necessity. 3. The false self you built to survive. Jung believed every child who grows up around unhealed trauma develops a false self, a protective identity created to manage the emotional world around them. This false self looks different for everyone. The good child, the one who never causes problems, keeps quiet, hides emotions, carries the weight of the home with a smile. The strong one, the child who grows up too fast, becomes the emotional rock, protects others from their own feelings. The invisible one, the child who disappears, avoids attention, stays small, not because they want to be small, but because the family had no room for their needs. The caretaker, the one who becomes the parent's therapist, emotional support, or rescuer. The people pleaser, the child who learns that approval equals safety, so they shape themselves around the expectations of others. None of these identities are authentic. They are survival roles, masks the child wears to navigate an emotionally unstable environment. Over time, the mask becomes the personality, and beneath it, the true self becomes weaker and weaker, not because it lacks strength, but because it hasn't been allowed to breathe. This is the weakness you feel today. It is the weakness of a self that was never given permission to exist. 4. The generational shadow. Jung believed the unconscious trauma of the parent becomes the emotional destiny of the child unless someone becomes conscious enough to interrupt the chain. He wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents. This unlived life includes the love they never received, the dreams they never pursued, the fears they never faced, the grief they never mourned, the emotions they repressed, the truths they denied. When parents cannot bear their own pain, it spills outward. Children, being deeply empathic and intuitive, pick it up. A parent who feels worthless unconsciously teaches their child self-doubt. A parent who fears abandonment unconsciously makes their child terrified of being alone. A parent who hides emotions unconsciously shames their child for having them. The child becomes a projection screen for the parent's unresolved shadow. This passing of the shadow creates the illusion, there is something wrong with me. But the truth is, you are carrying the emotional residue of generations before you. 5. Why you were the one who received the burden. Not every child receives the full weight of the parent's trauma. Why you? Jung believed certain individuals, often the most sensitive, intuitive, reflective, or imaginative, become the carrier of the ancestral pain. These children are born with porous boundaries. They pick up on emotion instantly. They feel the tension others deny. They understand unspoken things. To Jung, these children have a natural connection with the unconscious world, making them more susceptible to absorbing unresolved material. But sensitivity is not punishment. Sensitivity is a gift. It means you are born with the capacity to transform what others suppress. The reason you carried so much is the same reason you can heal so deeply. 6. How parents transfer trauma without knowing. Parents rarely intend harm. They act from their own limitations. Trauma transfers through several invisible channels. 1. Nervous system to nervous system. A parent living in fight or flight raises a child whose baseline is fear. 2. Emotional modeling. If a parent dissociates, the child learns to disconnect from themselves. 3. Communication patterns. Silence becomes language. Anger becomes expectation. Avoidance becomes normal. 4. Attachment styles. A parent who is inconsistent or unavailable creates attachment wounds in the child. 5. Roles assigned to the child. The golden child, the scapegoat, the lost child, the caretaker. None of these are accidental. They are shaped by parental trauma. 6. Projection. Parents unconsciously project their insecurities, disappointments, and fantasies onto their children. Jung believed unconscious parenting is the primary vehicle of generational trauma. A parent who cannot face their shadow forces the child to live inside it. 7. How this trauma becomes weakness in adulthood. Adults who grew up with inherited trauma often experience difficulty making decisions, overthinking, extreme sensitivity, chronic guilt, inability to set boundaries, fear of conflict, fear of abandonment, shame for having needs, emotional intensity, collapse under pressure. Society calls this weakness. Jung would call it an overloaded psyche. You were formed in a psychological climate that demanded far more strength than a child could provide. You developed coping mechanisms that no longer serve you, but at the time, they saved you. Your weakness is really emotional hyper-awareness, deep empathy, internalized responsibility, inherited fear, suppressed authenticity. This is not weakness, this is weight, and no one ever taught you how to set it down. 8. The moment you realize it was never your fault. Healing begins with one painful revelation. You were shaped by a story that wasn't yours. Your low self-esteem was not self-created. Your fear was not self-invented. Your emotional struggles did not originate within you. Jung believed that true healing begins when a person separates what belongs to me from what belongs to my parents. This separation is liberation. The shame you feel is not yours. The anxiety you carry is not yours. The belief that you are not enough is not yours. The pressure to be perfect is not yours. You were trained to feel these things by people who felt them long before you existed. 9. Why you feel responsible for everyone's emotions. Children raised by injured parents often grow up believing, if I keep everyone happy, I will be safe. If I make no mistakes, I won't be abandoned. If I stay small, no one will get mad. If I manage the emotions of the people around me, I'll be loved. This creates a crushing adult life. You anticipate others' needs before your own. You absorb tension like a sponge. You feel guilty for resting. You apologize for existing. You break under pressure because you've been holding pressure your entire life. Jung explained this pattern as the parentified child, the child who carries the emotional load of the entire family. These children grow into adults who feel weak, not because they are weak, but because they have been running a marathon since childhood. 10. The Jungian turning point, the moment of self-awareness. Jung taught that inherited trauma continues until someone becomes conscious enough to stop the cycle. This moment of awareness is not glamorous. It often feels like exhaustion, burnout, emotional collapse, intense therapy, spiritual crisis. The realization that your entire identity was built in response to someone else's pain. This moment is the death of the false self and the birth of the real one. To Jung, this is the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, free from the burdens of the generations before you. Your weakness begins to transform here. Weakness becomes insight. Insight becomes strength. Strength becomes identity. 11. How the weak child becomes the strong adult. Here is the paradox Jung believed. The child who inherits the most trauma often becomes the adult capable of the deepest transformation. Why? Because the one who feels the burden most intensely is the one who cannot ignore it. The numb do not heal. The unconscious repeat. The unaware continue the cycle. But you felt everything. You saw everything. You questioned everything. You carried everything. You were not weak, you were awake. And that awakening is what makes you capable of healing what others avoided. Your sensitivity becomes empathy. Your anxiety becomes awareness. Your fragility becomes intuition. Your pain becomes wisdom. In Jungian psychology, the weak one is often the one destined to transform the entire lineage. 12. You are not built to carry their pain, but you can transform it. The moment you understand that your weakness is inherited and not inherent, everything changes. You stop blaming yourself. You stop shaming yourself. You stop expecting perfection. You stop trying to be what your family needed. You begin asking new questions. What is mine? What is theirs? What do I want? Who am I when I'm not performing? What do I feel without obligation? This is the Jungian journey from inheritance to individuality. You are not here to carry the family wounds. You are here to break them. 13. Breaking the cycle. What healing actually means. Healing is not about confronting your parents. Healing is not about blaming them. Healing is not about erasing the past. Healing is about breaking unconscious patterns, creating emotional boundaries, letting go of inherited guilt, accepting your own needs, developing a self separate from your parents' story, integrating what was denied, giving yourself the safety you never had, building an identity from authenticity, not survival. This takes time. This takes courage. This takes awareness. But Jung believed this is the destiny of the child who inherits the shadow, to turn it into light. 14. The transformed person. When someone truly breaks the generational cycle, something remarkable happens. They become calmer, clearer, more intuitive, emotionally grounded, spiritually connected, compassionate, deeply self-aware, harder to manipulate, harder to guilt, able to set boundaries, able to love without losing themselves. The person who once felt weak becomes the strongest one in the lineage. 15. Conclusion. The weakness that was never weakness. You were shaped by forces you did not choose. You carried burdens that were not yours. You played roles you were never meant to play. You lived inside emotions that belonged to those who came before you. Your weakness was never weakness. It was inherited responsibility. And now, with awareness, you become the one who ends the cycle. The one who says, it stops with me. No more silence. No more suppression. No more inherited pain. Jung believed the person who heals themselves heals the entire family line behind them and the generations yet to come. You were not made weak. You were made aware. And awareness is the first step toward freedom. If this video opened your eyes to your past or your identity, consider subscribing for more deep dives into Jungian psychology, generational trauma, and the inner world. Thank you for watching, and remember, you are not broken. You are not weak. You were carrying too much for too long. Now it's time to put it down.